Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it. Hey everyone, welcome to the FigureItOutcast for August 2018. I'm Adam Koralik. What's up? How are you doing? So for those who have never listened to this before, welcome. This is primarily a Patreon podcast where Patreon backers get very early access to this. However, of course, I do release this publicly so that everyone can eventually listen to it if you want to, and I thank you very much for joining me and being here. If at any time you wish to join the Patreon, the link is in the description. Any amount is appreciated. Thank you very much for helping me fend off against adpocalypse. But anyway, let's get on to the point of this podcast. How are you guys doing? We're going to be doing a whole bunch of subjects here. I've got them in the description as well. You can feel free if you want to jump around. It's time code in there in case there's one subject you like or don't like or anything like that. You just want to listen to very specific things. I've got you, son. But anyway, we'll start off right here with the basically the first subject that was kind of just, frankly, stuff I did recently, more so than like news. So I had an interesting couple of weeks. I got to go, Sega brought me out to London, for a few different reasons, mostly Shenmue related. But while I was there, some lucky few of you were able to see I had my 100,000 subscriber special, which was a live Q&A from Sega's European headquarters. Sega was amazing to allow me to do that. They set it all up. They let me shoot everything and all that great stuff. I had a really good time. I did that, of course, with my buddy Ben, aka Shenmue, as I'm sure some of you know anyway. You should definitely check him out if you haven't. And we had a really good time, man. We just did the live Q&A and just talked, and you guys were amazing, very supportive of those who were in there. A lot of interaction. It was really just an amazing time. Now, usually my live streams stay up. I never really bring them down, but in this case, there was two reasons that if you wanted to go look for that live stream, you won't be able to find it. There's two reasons. One, the audio of the stream was really bad, to the point where most people who were watching it were basically complaining and saying, like, I can't watch this because the audio is terrible, etc. Which, was annoying, but more so it was the fact that after about a day, Sega requested I take it down, and I was like, well, is it the audio? They're like, well, partially, but also really this was more meant to be kind of a 24-hour thing. And I was like, oh, like, it was a miscommunication, but yeah, I took it down. I honored their request because they were, of course, very nice to even let me do it in the first place. But yeah, so ultimately the thing was more of a 24-hour thing, although I wish I had known that going in. I probably would have structured it a little differently or something like that, but such is something that happens when, doing something under such weird circumstances. But to those who saw it, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I get to do something very similar to that in the future. That would just be fantastic. And I also filmed, I can talk about this now. I filmed, or I shouldn't say I filmed, I recorded a bunch of footage of the game of Shenmue 1 and 2 for their trailers, although by the time most of you hear this, not only will the game be released, but those trailers will have long since been out. I also filmed something very special with them. But I can't talk about it, even though by the time the majority of you hear this, I'm sure the video will be released. But yeah, look out for something really bizarre if you haven't already seen it, that for some reason I'm in. I'm looking forward to being able to talk more openly about that at some point. But yeah, we shot a Shenmue related thing, and it's up there as far as weirdness goes. But yeah, no, I had a really good time filming it and being involved in all this, and it's been a blast. And I hope to be doing more content in a very similar vein. I recognize that once Shenmue is back out of the light, certain things like this probably won't happen. But I'm just kind of enjoying it while it's there. But hopefully I get to do other Sega related things. I've talked to them about that too, and it seems like there's definitely things that may happen, but I'm not permitted to discuss anything specifically, so I guess we'll have to drop that for now. You guys, you have no idea. it's so weird to be on the other side of that and get information, and then you can't speculate about it anymore because you're like, oh, I already know the answer to that one way or the other, and I know too much information, and then it's weird, man. I've never had I've been under NDAs before, but it's usually about short-term things. I'll work with Ubisoft a lot, and they'll have me sign an NDA that's very, very short limited, like short time. So like, for example, before E3, Ubisoft had this like players lounge thing for content creators, and you have to sign an NDA before you can go in there. And the NDA basically says like anything you see in here, you won't talk about until the embargo ends. But the embargoes are like a week later, if that. So as a result, like and it's all stuff the public knows for the most part. Like, for example, like I was going to play Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I'm not allowed to talk about the specifics of Assassin's Creed Odyssey until the embargo, but the embargo is only a week later. You see what I'm saying? So there's no like big piece of information I'm sitting on that I can't reveal or talk about or speculate anymore. It's weird. Sega's being under Sega's NDA, but that's as much as I can really say about it. I can't even be like, do I think this is going to happen? Do I think that's going to happen? Because I know too much. I'm not trying to sound like conceited or anything like that. I'm just saying it's weird, man. I've never been on the inside like that. And it's to anybody who's interested, who ever wanted to try to get into this industry and have that in their career or whatever. I'm just telling you, it's strange. It's very strange, especially when part of your content revolves around kind of analyzing stuff like that. I'm not some might argue that could be considered a bias. I would not, because I'm not inherently biased towards Sega content, despite what people would think. I love Sega content for its history, but I'll be the first person to say, like, the majority of the stuff they do now, frankly, does not interest me. There are obviously exceptions to that. And they know that. That's the kind of thing they were like, well, we're not going to try and have you involved in Football Manager, you know what I mean? Like, that's the kind of thing where I make no sense. Or like the Sakura Tyson stuff that they're doing. Like, I don't make sense for any of that. But stuff that I'm interested in, they're like, do you want to be involved in? And it's weird to know the inside track of stuff they're working on. That's all I'm saying, is that if your content revolves around being able to, there's tons of YouTubers out there who want to be able to talk about video games and talk about what their video game companies are doing and how they want them to behave and all that kind of stuff. And when you have too much information about how they actually operate, that can be kind of weird, because then you're like, well, I want to say that they should do this, this, and this, but I know why they're not because of X, Y, and Z, but I can't say that. You know what I mean? I don't know. I'm sorry if that's not coming off as super clear, but yeah, I'm just telling you, for as long as I'm enjoying, let's say, the 15 minutes of fame, if you will, for Shenmue, I'm just telling you, from at the time I record this, while that light is still on, that it was objectively weird to be involved in all of this, and I look forward, in a sense, to the day where I can openly talk about all of this. Without being, any risk of any sort of career-ending move. That's the other thing, man, is that I get these questions all the time about, like, is this going to be a thing? Is that going to be a thing? It's like, you understand, man, like, I can't answer that. If I did, my career would be over, I don't know. But anyway, so enough of all that. The other thing that I did recently is I had an amusing experience where I went to the Missouri Game Con. Now, the Missouri Game Con is a convention just outside of St. Louis. It's basically a retro game convention with, some additional activities like panels and guests and, little arcades and competitions, but mostly it's a game swap. Now, they've been doing that convention 3 years in a row, and I have been there. I've been a guest at all 3 years. I believe the first year I was pretty much the only guest other than like immediate locals, like I believe Stephen Lucas, the Nintendo World Champion, one of them was there, all 3 years, but he lives right nearby, stuff like that. But I was the only one they flew out in the first year. And then the same thing, they were cool enough to do that last year. And then this year, same deal. So it was, along with this year, they expanded the guest budget to include the entire Metal Jesus Rocks crew. Last year they had the Metal Jesus Rocks crew in part. They had, Kelsey, and they had Reggie, and they had Riggs. This year they added Kenzie and Jason, aka Metal Jesus himself. Plus, there was just a shift there. And the description I kept giving of the convention was that the first year was too small because it was in an Elk Lodge. And I was, when I'm the biggest guest, you're in trouble. Like, you need real guests, not me. I mean, I'm glad to go, but you need people who can actually draw a crowd. And I'm the first to admit that. The second year was too big. They they had it, using film terms. They had the event in a hockey arena, like the size of like a professional sports arena, which was way too big, and it went for too long. It was 2 days of actual convention floor time. And then this year was, I think, just right. It was 3 bears, you know, too little, too small, too big, just right. That would be basically the way I've been going around talking about it. So Missouri GameCon was a blast, and I hope that some of you get to go out there, and if they get to do another one, I think they intend to, but you know, it's one of those things where you don't really know until they kind of check and really see what the return was on it, because I know they lost a ton of money in the first couple of years, so obviously they don't want to keep doing that. So hopefully this yielded a profit for them. Convention itself was great. A lot of people came out. I met up with a lot of fans, which was awesome. You know, like I said, I'm not really a big draw. I know that growing in, but to anybody who would ever want to meet me at something like that, like, I'm always game to chat you up, take photos, you know, sign anything you want. I've ruined many copies of Shenmue and Dreamcasts over the years, and like, I mean, I always ask them, like, you seriously want me to do this? And I always tell them, because there's that cleaning part of me who, you know, makes the cleaning videos, and I'm always saying, like, if you change your mind later, like when I signed a Dreamcast, you just use a little bit of you know, hairspray, and then I'll take the Sharpie right out, and you get the Dreamcast looking good again. You don't want to keep it wrecked. Yeah, so that was a lot of fun, and I want to thank everybody who came out to that. You guys will be seeing my pickups from that later, probably in my playload video, though I'm not 100% sure exactly how I'm going to distribute that. The other thing is, I did a panel at the convention as well, and I believe they filmed it, so I'm going to try and get that footage and just see if I can do anything with it. So it's entirely possible by the time the majority of you have heard this podcast, that panel already is out on the channel. So I don't know, take a look. And if not, I probably ended up not doing it because I didn't like it for some reason. But yeah, so keep an eye out for that. And thanks again to the Missouri GameCon for having me involved. The amusing thing about that, though, was the timing. Because Sega wanted me out in London for a very specific set of days, and then of course the game convention happens on a very specific set of days, and so in order to get to both, what I had to do was I flew from Chicago to London. I believe it was on July 29th, and then I got there what is technically the 30th, the morning of the 30th in the UK. And then I did all the activities that they wanted, and then I took a flight back to Chicago on August 3rd, landed, and then I had to change planes in my own home airport at O'Hare in Chicago, and then fly down to St. Louis. Like, I never even left the airport. I just went straight from one event to the next. Which was amusing. The other thing about that is, too, like, even if I didn't live in Chicago, I would have had to have done that, because there would have, you know, you can't really get direct flights from St. Louis to the UK. I even asked. I told Sega about what I was planning to do here. They're like, well, we can try and get you a flight straight to St. Louis. And they looked into it, and like, there are no flights to St. Louis from the UK. I'm like, that doesn't surprise me. They're like, what you'd have to do is change planes in Chicago. I'm like, well, then let's just do that, because I was going to do that anyway. So, yeah, so that was amusing. Yeah, all right. So I think that's about all I have to say on that at the beginning there. So that's what's kind of going on with me. So let's move on to news-related items, things that are going on in the world. The first and foremost that I wanted to talk about was that Disney has completed its acquisition of Fox. It's over, everybody. Obviously, with the conditions that we've all known already, like they jacked up the price through a bidding war with Comcast. It ends up being something like $71 billion in assets, not cash. That's what a lot of people think. They hear that and they go, oh, so they just handed $71 billion over. No, they give them a lot of stock, particularly to the previous owners. In this case, mostly the Murdochs, get a large, basically a lot of futures in the ownership of the now Disney Fox empire. Or just Disney, because they're not going to keep the Fox name within the corporate structure. They'll use it only for movie distribution, is my guess, and television distribution. But yeah, that'll, they'll use it kind of, I'm guessing they're going to use the 20th Century Fox name kind of the way they've been using Touchstone or Buena Vista or any of these other Disney subsidiaries they use to release certain content. For those who maybe didn't know this, Disney obviously owns makes a shit ton of movies, but they have been using subsidiary names for years to make content that doesn't necessarily fit with the Disney brand. So like, for example, you're not like, they made Pearl Harbor. You guys remember Pearl Harbor, Michael Bay movie? Disney wasn't going to put, the Disney castle in front of that with Mickey Mouse coming out and everything. Right before that movie, so they have subsidiary companies that they use to make shall we say, more adult themed films. My guess is that's exactly what they're going to use the Fox name for, because it still has a lot of marketing power and it's still a big name, so they can use it to make all sorts of content that's not necessarily the stuff they want the Disney name in front of. Now, of course, the acquisition of Fox, it has a whole ton of meanings that I've talked a lot about. The adult in me is doesn't really like how much they're consolidating media like that, but the child in me is happy to see some of my favorite comic book characters all return home. Contrary to popular belief, that is not why Disney bought Fox's assets. They didn't do it so that the X-Men could be in the Avengers. They didn't do it so that Fantastic Four could be fixed. They didn't do it so Deadpool could switch universes. That was a bonus. Fox had access to a bunch of Marvel's characters that now Disney will get back. But that will help them. Then they're happy to have them. But that wasn't the real reason. And it's I don't know exactly what to. As far as the Marvel stuff, I think I read that you're not going to start noticing much of that until, a few years from now, because obviously they have to put all this stuff into production, and that's going to take literally years. But they also have to figure out what to do with the leftovers. Fox had actually completed almost completed two different X-Men movies, which was the New Mutants, and the other one was the beginning of their Phoenix trilogy. Both of which are either, they've been routinely postponed and not released. I mean, New Mutants was supposed to have come out like multiple months ago, and I believe the other one was supposed to come out somewhat soon. Both now are indefinitely delayed with no release. My guess is they will be randomly thrown into, particularly New Mutants will probably end up on a streaming service at some point and just seen as like this weird lost X-Men movie. I don't know what they intend to do with the Dark Phoenix movie. They may never release it. It's entirely possible that Disney's going to say, well, we don't want this, and let's just end this and not spend any further money on post-production or whatever. So that movie may never see the light of day. It's hard to say. For those who maybe haven't thought about that, the Hugh Jackman X-Men Fox universe ceases to exist from all this. None of that content, save for one thing, will survive, most likely. They're going to reboot the X-Men in their own vision, but they want to get some time away from the Fox universe so that people are more likely to accept it. But if you put out these remainder X-Men movies, then you create more brand confusion, and they don't want that. So it's understandable why they're not going to do it. I said with one exception, that's Deadpool. Deadpool was wildly successful for them, Fox specifically, and Disney obviously agrees with the casting choice of Ryan Reynolds, and they have the unique advantage that part of what makes Deadpool is the ability to break fourth walls. So it wouldn't be that hard to fold him into the MCU and fold his movies into it, especially because they already had a whole bunch of MCU references in them to begin with. I mean, granted they were jokes, but that's Deadpool. Like the helicarrier from Captain America's Civil War. No, not Civil War. Whatever the second one. Why am I spacing on it? The Winter Soldier. The one that crashes or whatever supposedly is the same one that was in Deadpool. I mean, that was originally a joke, but now it can be canon, because why not? The second one has all sorts of Thanos jokes, because Josh Brolin played both Cable and Thanos. That whole thing. So it wouldn't be that hard for them to just make people accept that's all the same thing. Because that's your universe jumps. It's just kind of part of his character. It's a unique situation. Like, you have to understand how unique that really is. Not only is it unique because the movie was successful and Disney kind of likes it enough to want to keep it, but it's also unique because that happened to happen with the only character, well, that I'm aware of anyway, where it really would have been possible to just make a couple of jokes and have the audience accept that they're jumping universes. That's obviously an extremely rare case just because of the unique nature of Deadpool as someone who breaks the fourth wall. So I think it's going to be cool, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that actually plays out, if it ever does. Because, I think they want to do the X-Force movie, but I've read that there's some tension between Ryan Reynolds and the whole concept of Disney being in charge. I don't know. That may, money talks. Maybe none of that will ever matter, but it's just interesting. So that's kind of it, guys. As far as that acquisition stuff, if you don't know, the Fox News division and the sports division will remain their own entities, or at least they will remain something else called Fox. Those might get folded into a different company, but Disney was unable or unwilling to acquire those because it's a conflict of interest to have multiple news networks. And not to get political, but at least multiple news networks that differ greatly on their output. And then the sports division they could not keep because they already own. Disney owns ESPN, in case you didn't know. So to have that would be considered a monopoly effect to have both of the major news networks. So Fox will end up somewhere else. I've heard rumbles that maybe NBC Comcast will acquire Fox's sports division just because they've really wanted the Major League Baseball contract for a long time, and that would give it to them. We'll see. Obviously, I don't know what the Murdochs are doing, but at least the entertainment division, the films, the TV shows, that stuff is all under the Disney umbrella now. Homer Simpson is now property of the House of Mouse. So it makes me curious, man, like what Disney is going to do. I think there are going to be mass cancellations of Fox content. Obviously the pluses is the Marvel type of things, but it's entirely possible that this will, I'm sure some won't even care or will be celebratory, but I do think this will probably lead to the end of The Simpsons. The Simpsons numbers have been going down, and unlike, Fox, who just had such a brand identity with that show's existence, Disney does not. So Disney may, be perfectly willing to end that show at the end of its next season, which is, I believe, the last one that's contractually obligated to exist. So we will see. But I'm going to be curious because I'm kind of calling it now. I wouldn't be surprised if this is the last season of The Simpsons. And hopefully Disney lets them finish it. Lets them produce a finale that would be appropriate, if that's indeed the case. Now, again, this is where we go back to speculation talk. Like I said at the beginning, if I actually worked at Disney or worked at Fox and I knew this, I couldn't speculate about it. You get it? But in my opinion, it wouldn't surprise me at all if Disney decides to just kind of end that. But it depresses me, but whatever. Let's move on to the next thing. Speaking of Disney, now here's part, I didn't actually get really detailed on this, but there is a reason that Disney did this. And like I said, it wasn't the Marvel characters. As mentioned before, in other, videos, and of course, even in my own, the real reason Disney did this is there is a digital streaming war coming. Think of it as the next format war, as opposed to the previous one was, Blu-ray versus HD DVD. There's, DVD versus VHS, VHS versus Laserdisc, VHS versus Betamax, all that stuff. This is the next one, and it's digital. Digital was kind of more or less socially introduced to us through Netflix, the ability to have this app on, multiple devices and then just watch videos that you don't actually physically have. Obviously, you're all aware of that, I'm sure, and how that works. But the original intent was that, Netflix was like the guys doing that, and that, a whole host of content would end up over there, and it was just kind of seen as more of a universal thing. Now it's kind of changed. A bunch of companies are creating their own digital streaming services because they recognize that it's kind of a monopoly effect. If they have their own and everybody's subscribing to theirs, they don't have to take a share of Netflix. They get the whole pie. So Disney, in their view, felt that they should do that. Disney has a history of being kind of unique when it comes to format wars. I'm not going to go into all that, but yeah, they typically are very strange about it. This is no exception. Disney not only wanted to have their own, unique service, but they want to have the biggest and best one. Now, Disney, of course, has a whole host of content, not only from the Disney brand, as that has your Little Mermaids and Lion Kings and all that stuff, but it also has all that subsidiary content, again, things like Touchstone and all that stuff. But they obviously felt that that was not enough content. So they decided to really amp it up, and that was the primary reason they bought the entertainment division of Fox. I mean, Fox has been around really since the 30s. I mean, I think they've been around for a long time. 20th Century Fox was around a long time. So they have a lot of content in the can. I mean, obviously a lot of, garbage like any studio would, but, they got a lot of best pictures in there. They got, a lot of television shows. They have a whole lot of content that Disney is able to now essentially just throw into their digital streaming service, which debatably right there makes it the biggest digital streaming service that exists or will exist, especially once they have whatever contracts they have with other sources like, Netflix specifically. I don't know if they do anything with Hulu or not. I think this actually, I take that back. I know they do because they owned a good chunk of Hulu and so did Fox. And I think now they own all of Hulu. I'm not really sure what they're going to do with that, but point is they have a whole host of content they can now throw up there and remove from other sources. So they want people to come and switch over. So we can get to a point where the whole wonderful thing about Netflix was you only had to buy it and that was it. We're going to get to a point soon where all these guys are competing with their own sources, their own streaming services, and you're going to be paying monthly for different things. Like CBS All Access, of course, was the one that CBS was pushing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that soon. But yeah, it's coming, guys, and Disney just made a huge investment in that. Again, like a $71 billion investment in that future. So yeah, keep in mind they bought Lucasfilm, which included, Star Wars. It included, as just an IP, Indiana Jones as an IP, but it also included, LucasArts, which they didn't use, THX, Skywalker Sound, Industrial Light and Magic, and Lucasfilm proper. They bought all of that for $4.4 billion. And they took Fox for 71. That's intense, man. That's a lot. I should have mentioned this before. The other consequence of Disney's acquisition of Fox is that all of Star Wars will be under one roof now. For those who don't know, Fox was the original distributor for those movies. They had, I believe, their contracts were much more temporary with the prequels. So those were actually back at the House of Mouse. But the original trilogy, Empire and Jedi's contract, whatever the deal was going to expire within a couple of years anyway. So they would be able to post those movies on their streaming service. But A New Hope, the distribution rights for that were lock, stock, and barrel at, Disney for the rest of our lifetimes. Like that, at Fox for the rest of our lifetimes. This would fix that. So you can now have a complete... all Star Wars content is now at the House of Mouse completely and utterly for them to do whatever they want with. However, I believe I noticed the other day that they have no intention of putting up the entirety of the saga for some reason until like 2024. Maybe to satisfy some other legal thing. I mean, I would assume it's pretty much that simple. That or they want to time it with something else. I honestly don't know. But usually in situations like that, when I hear a very specific number like that, there's some sort of legal hurdle that won't clear until then. So we'll see how that actually goes. I can't imagine they're like, oh yeah, we have this big plan for 2024. I think it's just like, nah, fuck, we can't do it until 2024. But yeah, tell me, would you guys subscribe to the Disney service? Personally, I want to say no for now, but of course that's easy to say because I have other options. But we'll see how it plays out. I'm, of course, a physical media guy, and I know we're getting to that point, man. It's going to be depressing where you start getting these big movies and big releases and big things I want to see that never get physical editions. Like now you see them in the form of these, like a lot of the Marvel shows I like that will by the way start only coming out on this platform eventually when their Netflix contract expires, and eventually I'm sure a lot of the next Netflix stuff will migrate over there. It annoys me that that's the only place I can see it, but there is still always a physical release like down the road. But as it stands, like when Disney put this much effort into it, it's entirely possible they'll pull their whole physical media line. So you may not be able to get physical versions of a lot of these. And Disney doesn't fuck with that, man. Like they're very infamously the guys who put stuff in the vault, the Disney vault, and don't bring it out again for 30 years. So yeah, man, there's I don't like that because it gives too much control to them, where they can, put up a movie or something like that on Netflix or whatever. And obviously, in this case, whatever their Disney streaming service. I think it's just called the Disney Digital Streaming service, at least for now. The idea that they can put something up there, have it be exclusive to that platform, and then just pull it, and then you can just never see it again, except for pirated versions. I really don't like that. I really don't. But at least that's what we have to potentially live with now. Now, moving on, let's move on to another subject. This is still somewhat Disney related. In an effort to appease fans of Star Wars, Disney is starting to make certain moves to fix their image. They're now somewhat splintered and broken franchise, which hurts my soul because I love Star Wars. They did something to make people happy, and I'm sure a lot of you guys know this by now, but at San Diego Comic-Con, they came out and announced that they're resurrecting Star Wars Clone Wars. Only for a brief, I think it's a 13-episode run, but there's a reason for that. When Disney originally bought Lucasfilm, Star Wars Clone Wars was the only real big active thing in development over at Lucasfilm, like of all the ones that were actually getting released, not like Seth Green's ill-fated Star Wars stories or whatever that was, like the weird little comedy show that never made it out. Unlike that show, which never got released, so it never really built up a fan base, Clone Wars was actively going. I mean, it was in the middle of it. It had finished its 5th season. The 6th season was in production. And when Disney bought the franchise, they just threw down the banhammer and canceled the rest of the show. Ultimately, what they would do is, I believe they released the first 13 episodes of that ill-fated season because those had been finished. They released them through Netflix exclusively originally, and then eventually to physical media in the form of Blu-ray. That's the kind of thing I approve of. But then they said that's it. You know, there was eventually, in an effort to appease fans, it turns out the next 7 episodes were, at least the audio had been finished, but the video portion was still in the test animatic type of thing, where they just kind of have a general sense of what the episode is and where it's going. Extremely rough looking CGI. They released those to fans just to kind of say, like, hey, these episodes, this is what was going to happen, at least in these. It's canon. So those episodes were actually canon, even though they were never finished. And then there was apparently, 6 more that were never even at that phase. So under incredible fan pressure, Disney has decided that they're going to resume production and let those 13 episodes get finished so that the 6th season can be finished properly. It'll now be called the 7th season. But I think that's amazing, especially because, like I said, some of that stuff was canon, and there's whole plot lines of that show that were never really resolved, some bigger than others. They kind of used Star Wars Rebels to conclude some of those plot lines. So it's going to be interesting because, you know, what that means is they're going to have to go back and make story changes to Clone Wars to wrap it up in different ways so that whatever happened in Rebels can still happen. That'll be kind of interesting, but I'm glad they're doing that, and to give that show a better finale because it really deserved it. And fan passion, man, it's good, and I'm glad that Disney at least is trying to admit that they made some mistakes with the Star Wars franchise and are going to work on it. So yeah, happy about that. Speaking of resurrections of other star-related things, God, this one's weird. Patrick Stewart is returning to Star Trek. Now, I loved Star Trek. There was, a few years ago, it might have even been like 10 years ago at this point, I remember that was the first time I watched anything Star Trek related. Really, believe it or not, I hadn't seen anything prior to that. And I sat down and I actually really committed to it. I'm like, this is such a big piece of culture, American culture, that I need to really understand it better. And I sat down and watched every single episode of Star Trek content that had been produced at that point. Around then, Enterprise had been the most recent show and was canceled after its 4th season, and there really was no lookout for anything to happen. This would have been like 2008. It was before the J.J. Abrams reboot. So I sat down and watched everything. The original series, animated series, Next Gen, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, Enterprise. Watched it all in order, along with the movies, just to know that history, So I grew to really develop an interest in Star Trek, and I have to say, if you ask my opinion, Picard, best captain of all time. So hearing that Patrick Stewart's back in Star Trek, I have 2 reactions to that. The fan part of me is like, oh, that's so cool. They're, bringing back, Patrick Stewart. I love Picard. But then there's the other part of me that goes, you know what? I know too much about the production side of this show. I'm not involved with it in any way, shape, or form. Don't get me wrong, but I have read a lot about it. And the kind of the behind the scenes operations of what CBS is doing. Now, I mentioned before briefly that CBS is trying to reinvigorate Star Trek as just an IP because it's worth something. And that's why they try to use it to get people to go watch CBS All Access and things like that. Star Trek Discovery was made under very strange circumstances where, in case you don't know, Paramount, Viacom, I believe, was the parent company of both Paramount and CBS. And at one time, the entirety of the Star Trek brand was all under one roof, but they split up. So you have Paramount in the film and TV division, and then you had the film division, and CBS being the TV division. And each of them owns different rights to different Star Trek related things, which is why Star Trek Discovery has so much weirdness in it, where like it claims to be more part of the Prime timeline, but it's actually kind of more it has the look and feel of the Kelvin timeline, and then kind of pretends like it's its own thing. Star Trek has also kind of gone out of its way to not really involve previous content creators for Star Trek. Which basically means you have a whole bunch of people who don't know that content very well and are just kind of forming their own new adventure. It's kind of a fan nightmare, and it's largely done for corporate bullshit reasons, and that makes it very frustrating. So that's why when I hear Patrick Stewart's returning to Star Trek, the fan in me who only hears that gets excited because I loved Picard so much. But the other side of me knows that really it's probably not going to be very good. Fans are probably not going to like it very much. It's probably not really going to honor any of the stuff we actually really like. It's just the nostalgic part of you. And then you think, well, why would Patrick Stewart do it? I love Patrick Stewart, man. I do. I think he's fantastic. But this is the same dude who agreed to the Emoji Movie. Like, he might be at that phase where he's just, I mean, you see it on his social media. He's just having fun. He might be at that phase where he's just, he's doing the same thing that James Cameron told Arnold Schwarzenegger when it came to Terminator 3. Just take the money and run. They offered him money to do this. Take it, run, get yours. You know what I mean? Like, it's legacy money. It's for your, kids and everything. Make some money off the character you played 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I kind of get the feeling that that's more what it is. He's just kind of doing it to do it. I don't think him being there will be any sort of great mark of quality. Not anything against him. I think that he's going to have an insurmountable hurdle there, because I don't think, unless they completely restructure the way they want to do Star Trek as a brand, I don't think they can fix that. That might happen with the attempted remerger that's going on, but as of now, I can't imagine this show would benefit from it. Maybe the one after. Yeah, so I'd love to say that I'm excited about this, but the truth is I'm not. And it is what it is. Anyway, let's move on here. We have a round of shout-outs. So for those who, as I mentioned before, this is a Patreon podcast, and you can donate at any time for any specific tier and get different things. You can get small stuff like early access to my videos. I usually post them like a couple of days before they come out on the main channel. You can get that. You can get a shout-out, as we're going to do here in a moment. You can, even make subjects for this podcast, and you can even be on this podcast if you want. Any amount is appreciated. Thank you very much. But this round of people, shout-outs, they've paid specifically just to have their name mentioned here, and also just more or less, let's keep it real. You guys are just awesome people who are just trying to support me and make sure I can keep doing this. So I really do appreciate that. Thank you. And those awesome people are Jesse Perez, who brand new person, welcome. Well, actually, no, you were here at the $5 tier, but he upgraded to the 20, and I really appreciate that, Jesse, seriously. Justin Webb, who I just have a small side story about Justin, because he hung out with me a bit at the Missouri GameCon, and this dude did me a solid. My buddy Ben, Shenmue, who I mentioned also at the beginning of this video, collects PSVR games, and while I was at the convention, I found a guy selling Pixel Gear, which is a limited run game that's VR, physical exclusive, through them, and the guy wanted $35 for it. So I asked him if he would take 30, and he said sure. And I said, do you take credit cards? And he said no. And I said, okay, let me see what I can do about finding some cash. So first of all, I got Ben's approval. He said, yeah, I'll do it for 35. It's fine. And so then I was like, okay, no credit cards. What do I do? Because I don't really keep cash on me. And I went over and I found Justin just randomly. I'm like, hey, Justin, this is really weird. Do you have $30 in cash? And the dude just takes it out, doesn't even really ask me why. Hell of a nice guy. That's exactly my point. And I was like, oh, don't worry, I don't need just your money. It's not like that. I told him what I was doing, and he was like, oh, all right. And I was like, yeah, just give me your email address, and I'll have this dude in the UK send you some money through PayPal. And so I told Ben, okay, send $30 to this email address. And then Ben, he sends 35. Not because he was trying to be like amazing. He just kind of spaced out and didn't really pay attention to what I actually said. So whatever. And then we tried to do a refund process, and it was going to charge more to do a refund than the difference of $5. So it was like, oh, the hell with this. So Justin got to make $5 off of this weirdness. Ben got the game for the original price, and the seller got screwed by losing $5 on a transaction where $5 extra was available. So yeah, thank you, Justin, for being the hero that made that whole stupid situation possible. Then Jonas Pachanka, Corey Marsh, who is also, he's donated stuff to the channel over the years. You can see reviews on. Rob Janos, buddy of mine who I hang out with every time I get to see him out in New York. Awesome guy. Luis Bonilla, Michael Kelly, Eric Perez, Trey Wagner, who's actually one of my best friends, and Tim Inman. So once again, Jesse Perez, Justin Webb, Jonas Pachanka, Corey Marsh, Rob Janos, Luis Bonilla, Michael Kelly, Eric Perez, Trey Wagner, Tim Inman. Thank you guys so much. You guys are awesome, all of you. And thank you for your continued support. And hopefully some of you guys out there decide you want to support me as well. Much appreciated. Moving on. Next subject is Antman and the Wasp. So last time I talked briefly about this movie in my podcast because I hadn't seen it yet. But then I literally went to go see it that day. Now, I'm sure a whole host of you have actually seen it by now, but I've also heard that the movie kind of really underperformed, which, to be honest, makes sense. I mean, this is the movie that had to follow up The Avengers, and when you have a big event type of movie or event type of, video, I can tell you this through YouTube, the thing that follows it always tanks. In the case of this, people weren't nostalgic enough yet and missing the Marvel brand after Avengers. They kind of needed some time. We all want to know what happens next, but this movie wasn't going to satisfy that. And I get, after seeing it, we're going into full spoilers territory, so if you don't want to see any of that, move down. I get why they did it the way they did it. 99% of that movie, you're watching it and you go, this should all take place before Avengers. Like, this shouldn't be where it is. It's really only the end credits or the mid-credits scene and I guess the actual end credits scene that solidify why they did it, where they did it. And if you were a fan of it, Infinity War, I can tell you right now that mid-credits scene is the best scene in the movie, in my opinion. And it also is the sole reason that they did it, where they did it. Maybe other than financial benefits, but it also suggests that what happened to Ant-Man is he's going to be a big part of how they resolve that situation. Because he was in a situation, I believe, that basically immunized him from the effects of Thanos. Let's just put it that way. I want to focus on that side of stuff because that to me is more interesting, which is probably the problem with that particular film, is that the only thing that's really super interesting about it is its connection to a completely different movie. But as a film itself, like pretending those two scenes weren't there, it was a perfectly fun action adventure, comic book movie. It was very serviceable. I enjoyed it just fine. It certainly wouldn't be on any of my favorite, Marvel movie lists or anything like that. It was fine. It added some new elements to the universe, but again, those elements are more interesting when you think about them in the context of the greater Marvel Cinematic Universe. So yeah, but just as an actual film, it was fine. I'd probably give it like a 7 out of 10, something like that. Maybe some people say that's a little high, but yeah, if you liked Marvel stuff, it was a nice little holdover. It was a nice little extra thing to kind of, keep your palate wet before we have to move on to the next one, which I believe is Captain Marvel, but we don't get that until, I don't think, next year. I'm actually kind of excited about that one because I really don't know much about her as a character other than that she's like extremely, extremely capable. So yeah, I'm just curious how that expands the lore. To be honest, we're at that point now with Marvel stuff. The best ones, the most exciting ones are the ones that really expand the greater universe, as opposed to the ones that tell isolated, self-contained stories for the most part. And that's a huge problem that they're going to run into, is that you can't always expand the universe. It gets too big, it gets too convoluted, and it gets too hard to follow. And then eventually people crave the exact opposite. Marvel's been very good about kind of balancing things, and I wish them luck on continuing to do that. And yeah, I hope that they can work out their other behind-the-scenes issues, like with James Gunn. And I'm in the camp of just give the guy his job back. Just give him a job back. I'm on that team. But anyway, I guess that's all I really want to say about Ant-Man and the Wasp, which is, I guess, probably the problem is that we focus more on the same thing everyone else does, which is the most exciting thing about it is the thing that really didn't have much to do with the actual film, which is sad. But that said, I still enjoyed it, and I would recommend it to any sort of Marvel fan for sure. Next up, still within the comic book kind of movie universe, Nick Cage finally got to play Superman, sort of. I just found this interesting. Nick Cage voiced Superman in the recent Teen Titans Go to the Movies movie. That's not my franchise at all. I don't really know a whole lot about Teen Titans. I've never really cared about it. I'm sure as a concept that's fine, and maybe they would even work well as a more cinematic experience in a serious tone. I don't know enough about them to say whether or not they would. But the reason I found this interesting is that Nick Cage played Superman. And the reason that's interesting is that at one time Nick Cage was supposed to play Superman in the ill-fated Superman Lives. Now, Kevin Smith has told unbelievable stories about the production of that movie. And the late, great John Schnepp even did a great documentary about it called something like the Death of Superman Lives, which is a really good movie all about what happened to that particular film and why Nick Cage's Superman movie never came into existence. Highly recommend watching that if you're a Superman fan. So the fact that now, finally, he got to play Superman in some capacity, obviously not in the ideal way for him. The fact that he got to do that, I was just kind of like, giving a little applause. I think that's kind of neat that he got to do that. For those who don't know, he's been a staunch Superman fan for a long time. Like, he has one of the most insane Superman collections on the planet. I think he is one of the few people who actually does own, Action Comics, number one, like the first Superman comic from 1939. I think he actually is one of the few people that actually has one of those. Like, the dude is, really into Superman. So it would be a huge honor to be involved with something like that if you're that big of a fan. Kind of like myself with all that Shenmue stuff. Like, the fact that I got to have anything to do with it is just, I can see why that would be very psychologically rewarding, even if it's not exactly the way you wanted it to go. So yeah, that's about it on that particular subject. I have not seen this movie. That alone just made me want to talk about it. But let's talk about some video games. Let's move on and talk about some video games. We've been talking mostly about movies and other things. Now, to be honest, there isn't a whole lot about any particular games I wanted to talk about right now. Just a couple of things, small things. First and foremost is this one. It goes out to all the Legend of Zelda fans. Nintendo gave Breath of the Wild its official spot in the Zelda timeline, but it's kind of amusing because the way it's presented is like, all right, here's the definitive answer of where it goes. But more or less, the official position is it takes place all the way at the end, and any sort of inconsistencies, it's because it's another timeline. It was more or less, it's just the creators being like, look, man, we didn't really think that hard about that. That part didn't matter to us. So if you want to place it, I guess put it there, whatever. Which has always been who was it that, I think it was actually James Rolfe, did a very good video about the Zelda timeline problem. And basically the short conclusion is Zelda games were never meant to have a timeline. Fans just kind of retroactively gave it one. And Nintendo eventually was, kind of went, all right, sure, here you go. This is how it's supposed to be. Even though the creators never really intended for that. And that's why you get all sorts of issues that really can't work. And then to try and fix those issues, different timelines? Sure. And I guess that's kind of the case with Breath of the Wild. It's like they didn't set out to make a game and figure out where exactly it would fit in continuity. They made a game that they were proud of and that they knew would be good in their vision. It's kind of fans who would want to know, well, where does it take place? They didn't think about that. So they're just like, yeah, here, sure, whatever makes you happy, man, is more or less the official position on it. But for those interested, it apparently takes place very much down the line at the very end and is like some other type of timeline. So there you go. You can read more about it, though. To be honest, there really isn't much else to say that is officially known. And when I say official, now that I'm in these weird positions, like I mentioned at the beginning, you'd be amazed what kind of little off-the-cuff mark you make and people just run with, like, too far. This is an interview with some guy, and he's just like, yeah, sure, it goes here. And now it's like, all right, it's official. It's a Nintendo sanction. It's like, you're going a little extreme there. But there you go. It apparently, if you want to take that interview very literally, it takes place very much at the end and is a different timeline. That's it. That's really all I wanted to say about that. The next thing I want to talk about is Gamescom. So by the time the majority of you have heard this, Gamescom will be over. But to the few of you who have listened to it through Patreon, Gamescom is still coming up. And curious if basically what your reaction to Gamescom is this year. Like, to those who are hearing this early, is there anything you're looking forward to seeing more of? And to those who saw it later, or listen to it later. Was there anything at Gamescom you liked in particular? I personally, I'm not really expecting much when it comes to Gamescom. There's a distinct possibility I will actually be going. I don't actually know that yet at the time I record this. I've been told to like kind of keep that window open because that could be a thing. The way those type of things work is usually you're told like a vague idea of something, and then you don't really know until like a day or two before if you're actually doing it. So I have no clue. But if I go, I hope to do something exciting there. I went to Gamescom a few years ago, and to be honest, Gamescom is kind of a shit show. Like, it's too big, man. For those who've never been there, man, Gamescom is way too big. There's too many people there, and you end up just kind of like finding a corner and just being like, fuck it. I hung out a lot in the retro area because nobody goes up there, and the air conditioning actually works. Yeah, Gamescom is too big. So the only reason I would go is if I was actually needed for that. It was still fun, don't get me wrong, but yeah, it's kind of too big for me. That said, hopefully at least some cool content came of it. Yeah, I really don't have much else to say on that. I'll let you know if I end up going and what actually happens with that, but we'll see. The last thing I want to talk about is this is the last time I will be able to say to those who hear this early anyway, go out and pick up the Shenmue re-release. Obviously, it's my thing. It's my passion project that I somehow got to be involved in. And I'm thrilled for it for so many reasons, and a lot of it, of course, I can't really talk about still at the time I do this. And some of those stories that I've been told about, man, there's so many things, like the behind the scenes of how this came into being, and it's never what you guys think. It's not as simple as people want to believe, and I want to talk about it, but I literally asked the president of Sega of Europe, like, hey man, these are the things that we're talking about, and I want to know of these things, which can I discuss? And he basically said like none of that. I was like, damn it, because there's so many great things that I want to talk about, but I can't do it. And it's just it's frustrating. It's so frustrating. But like I said at the beginning of this, I value having a career, so I don't want to destroy it for that. But let me just say, guys, that it's not as simple as like, oh, they saw the dollar signs and then they just quickly made it and there we go. It's nothing like that. And to me, it's such a symbol of hope for what can be done with fan power. Because I'll tell you this right now, guys, this is no secret. That franchise was as dead as could be. Not only from the Shenmue 3 perspective, but also the entire concept of a re-release. Like, it was a dead idea. And I'll just go short with it and say that it was a large amount of fan pressure that did it. And I don't mean like, the annoying version of that, or where's Shenmue 3? Like, I mean, that helped, but it was the organization of it. The fact that it wasn't just the occasional like random person, like for example, I'll use Sonic Adventure 3 as a comparison. There is no Sonic Adventure 3. That's not a thing. But there is, while people will occasionally throw out there where is Sonic Adventure 3, there is no mass community organized and plotting regularly to get Sonic Adventure 3 to happen. Unlike the Shenmue community, which not only hung around, it made a very consistent, reliable effort to prove that they exist and to say, we are not kidding, we want this. And they supported every little bone that came out, t-shirts, whatever it was, they were always there. Sonic, it's obviously harder to gauge because Sonic still exists and still makes content, but it's just what I'm saying. The organizational effort was a large part of it. And then there were other factors that I can't discuss, but it's been such a unique experience to be involved in, and it's not even from my perspective, like, take me out of the equation. It was a unique experience for any fan base to be able to do what we did. I speak to those, of course, in the Shenmue community, and to those who are not part of it, just objectively as a case study. It's interesting to see that fans were able to do this, because it's kind of unprecedented when you really break down what its history is. I mean, obviously there's been other resurrections of things in the past, or there's been revisits or whatever, re-releases. This is, you went from one extreme end of the spectrum to like this big giant flop of a game that it's the parent company wants nothing to do with. It was dead, it was buried. They told you repeatedly it was dead, it was buried. There was absolutely no development or work or effort, anything. Bringing it all the way back to profitable, and successful. You successfully resurrected Shenmue 3, which was it's kind of like announcing Half-Life 3. It's just a gag at a certain point. But it not only happened, it broke all expectations of the possibility of its success. Remember, their initial goal was $2 million. Not that we would have had an amazing game for $2 million, but the fact that not only did that get reached almost immediately, it was surpassed pretty handedly. And then you get on to this point where you get the parent company to kind of return to the franchise and actually put a lot of effort into it. Despite what people think about, it doesn't even have the 4K. It's like, you literally have no idea what you're even asking. You have no clue how hard the restoration effort of this was. And that's the stuff I can't tell you that I want to talk about. But maybe someday I can open that door. I don't know. But for now, just trust me when I say, guys, this was a well-executed, well-done restoration. And they put a lot of effort into this where it was possible. And even when certain things seemed impossible, they went out of their way to try and make them work as best they could and improve upon them. Some things were still technically impossible without a complete and utter remake, just given the way that Shenmue was originally created. It's not the most friendly piece of code to work with. Yeah, God, I want to talk so much more about it, but no, I'm going to have to cut it off here before I accidentally say something I can't say. So, yeah, that is my podcast for this month of, again, August 2018. Thank you very much to everybody for listening, and thank you, of course, to all the backers who support me and listen to this, and you get those who get early access to it, and, of course, also those who are getting shout-outs, which, once again, quick round here: Jesse Perez, Justin Webb, Jonas Pachanka, Corey Marsh, Rob Janos, Luis Bonilla, Michael Kelly, Eric Perales, Trey Wagner, Tim Inman. Thank you all so much. You guys are the best. I'm sorry, I made a huge mistake earlier. I forgot Kyle Vaughn. Kyle Vaughn is at the level where he gets to pick a subject, though in his case, he didn't pick any particular subject. So you know what, Kyle? We're going to be unique here. Every single subject we talk about today, you picked every single one. Thank you, Kyle Vaughn, for picking every single subject inadvertently today. Thank you very much. Thank you to all the listeners. You guys are the best. Even, especially, not only the Patreon backers, but everybody who listens to it, publicly when it comes out. I just appreciate the support. You guys are all awesome. Thank you so much. I'll see you all later.